Hi everyone. So starting the broadcast now. I'm going to put a message here in the text about the live feed. So let me know in the chat where you're joining us from, and you mentioned a little bit about your. Okay, so I can see that the video is live, and so yeah, let me know a little bit about your programming experience. I see from some of the survey answers that most of you who've responded are both online teachers and independent learners, and that most of you don't have any coding experience with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. One person did a little bit on Codecademy. That's perfect. I've done programming on Codecademy as well, and it's a great place to get started. And I was looking at some of the feedback on where should we go from here after this webinar, and the majority of you have said that maybe watching a series of video tutorials would probably be the most helpful. So I'm going to keep that in mind and take the little snippets of code that we're going to look at here, and we're going to start looking at some basics of what is what are the basics for HTML and JavaScript and CSS. So just kind of checking some of these messages as they're coming in from like Facebook, Twitter, before we kind of get into content here. So just about 10 more minutes or so before people start to trickle in. I'll just mention a little bit about myself. I'm an online teacher and language learner. I've been learning languages, like foreign languages, for about 20 years. And I've always been a bit interested in the dynamics of kind of computer-assisted learning. And it's a really booming market right now with websites and apps that you can use on smartphones and tablets. And so I've tested out a couple of them, and I know that there are ones that kind of cost a lot of money on the market, and sometimes I feel like the one size fits all approach to building foreign language computer assisted content, it doesn't fit everybody's needs because it's a one size fits all product. And not to discredit the research that goes into building those applications, but sometimes you can't always kind of tailor the content to what you want to learn, or maybe your learning style, or if you are a teacher, the learning style of your students. So if you want to create something that might be dynamic. And another thing that I notice when I see kind of websites that are just static, that you send your student to a quiz that has maybe like 10 questions about, let's say, prepositions in English, or some kind of grammar test with, let's say, present simple in English. Once your students go to that website and they take this little static quiz that's there, and then they go down to the bottom of the page and they have the answers, it's just a disposable website. They're not going to go back to that quiz because they did it once, and so the content is, I mean, they consumed it, and that's it. They'll go away as quickly as they finish that quiz. So what I like to create is dynamic, and that each time you go to it, there's going to be something new. Just see if there's a problem with Hangouts. Okay. My connection seemed to hang there for a second. I'm gonna refresh the browser here. So just making sure that the connection is still working. It's always good to test this. Okay, yeah. So is he still going? Okay, so I see that there's a couple people in the chat box already. So thanks for attending. Thanks for watching this webinar. So as I was saying before, my experience as a language teacher and as a language learner has had an influence on why I do my own web app kind of development and programming. And because I see a lot of websites and apps that are in the market, but I think sometimes those products are hastily made with the purpose of making a lot of money in a quick way, and so the product is not always they may do a very brief topic. They might not go into it very deeply, and they just want to get something that's going to be on the market and that people can start using. And I know a lot of people say like really good things about some websites like Memrise and Duolingo and Rosetta Stone, but each time I kind of test them, I usually see some kind of feature that I like, I wish it could do this instead. Like I've done the do-it-yourself, like create your own course on on Memrise, and I have a pretty successful one for learning the piano. And I created all the little visuals with the pictures and the linking audio files with this. But sometimes the way that the algorithms, the way the computer is kind of mixing code and with the pictures and the images was not always the most logical way, or kind of compartmentalized the way I wanted to sequence something as if it really was a course that was going from step by step. And unfortunately, it was sometimes taking like a really big database of knowledge and mixing everything together. So I didn't have as much control over the way that this program was selecting and presenting the information to students for the test. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start developing some of my own tools. So I have a website like this one, hugginsinternational.com. 3 years ago, I got started with a blogspot website, and I'll put the link here. hugginsinternational.blogspot.com. You guys can look at that maybe after this webinar, or maybe I can show a few screenshots in here. But that's where I kind of started doing these experiments with web app development. And prior to that, I did a little bit with Excel spreadsheets and using a lot of embedded formulas like if, then, or if else, and taking variables. And I had all these little cells that were kind of working together. And somebody told me, hey, you should turn this into a web app. And at that time, I had no idea how to do that. I just HTML, JavaScript, CSS, it was just so overwhelming and so confusing. And I had a hard time trying to find some kind of really simple hands-on tutorial that could walk me through this kind of step by step. So I had to learn a lot of this on my own. I did take information like from Codecademy, and I also, like, one of the really good sources that I liked was the w3schools.com. The link is below. Some of these links that I'm mentioning right now, they are all the way at the bottom of this webpage and below the survey. And so you can check those out as well after we are talking here. And so what I really liked about the w3schools.com website is if you had a question about something like HTML, they would give you what's called like a sandbox, which is they give you the sample of the code on one side, and then they give you a small window where you see the results. And they invite you to tinker with the code. And what's really nice is that you know that code, if you don't do anything with it, you know it works. So this is an approach that I really like, with kind of this kind of reverse engineering sometimes, or break something, see how it works, fix it, put it back together. That's kind of my hands-on approach to the coding. And I like that part as well with the Codecademy, where they say, hey, we're going to do this task. Now do it. It's not just reading theoretical knowledge about how the web works or how HTML works or JavaScript works. They actually get you to do it step by step. But once I got into their little tutorials and what they wanted to teach me, very quickly I kind of pulled back and said, well, I want to start working on the stuff I want to do. I want to build my own little quizzes or ways to work with grammar in foreign languages. So as quickly as I got into Codecademy and just got my feet wet, so to speak, I started to kind of experiment as much as I could with my own code. So today we're going to take a look at just kind of one little app that I was just building right now. This is based on some answers, some questions that one person in one of the Facebook groups had mentioned to me. Her name is Nikki. So these are some of her questions. And this is based on a fill in the gap exercise. And we're going to kind of go through it step by step of how I built this. And this is based on other exercises that I've done and some examples that I've seen like 3 years ago when I got started with the W3 schools, and just kind of tinkering with the way you get something to be dynamic. So as before we kind of start looking at the code, I just want to mention a few things of like basically what is kind of the function here of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And let's compare it to, let's say, like a house. Let's say it's a house. Now, when you think of a house, and let's say you have an architect, the architect might give you the floor plan. Where are certain rooms located? Where is a door? Where is a window? What is the kind of, how do things flow within that structure of the house? That is your HTML. That's where you put things on a web page. Do you put a button here? Do you put a picture over here? Do you put a text box here? Just those things that you see on where you want things to kind of, how they should be kind of positioned. That might be basically the skeleton in your HTML. Then you don't just go into a house and start tinkering with a light switch. If you just hit a button, a light switch, it's not going to do anything. So you need to have like electricity being installed in the walls and connecting that to a grid, power grid. Otherwise, buttons, light switches on a wall, they're not going to do anything just by themselves. And the same thing, you might go into a bathroom and you might turn a faucet and expect there to be water to come out, but if you don't connect the plumbing throughout the house for the kitchen, the bathroom, if you don't connect that, nothing's going to happen. So that connecting electricity, connecting plumbing with water, that's kind of like your JavaScript. That is the stuff that kind of creates the dynamic aspect of your HTML. So when you have a button, you click the button, you expect something to happen, but you need to build that thing that's going to happen. So if it's a button and you say, okay, turn on the lights, you want to see some effect. So you want it when you see some feedback that tells you, okay, this button actually did something. Now, the other thing with that of, okay, HTML might be your floor plan of where you put stuff and what stuff you include in your page. And now the JavaScript is how do things interact with each other. So if you click a button, it runs some tiny little action, or it takes information from one part of the HTML and it does something with it, and then it gives information feedback back on the HTML. So you get this dynamic feedback loop of information as a maybe a prompt that's on the HTML, maybe a question. If we're relating this to teaching, you put a question, you put a text box, you give the person an opportunity to put an answer. You have a button that says check your answer based on this question, and then it'll give you some feedback to say, okay, was that answer correct? Yes or no? So that's the kind of thing we're going to build today. And CSS is the kind of styling. Like imagine you have this house, you have some furniture, you have the rooms, you have the plumbing, you have electricity installed. Now you might want an interior designer to come in and say, how about we make all of these doorknobs the same? Or how about we add some color to these doors? Or how about we make sure that all the windows in the house have the same format? So maybe the architect just says, here's a window, here's a door. They don't give any details about how you want it to look. And your CSS is going to allow you to kind of add a lot of that styling into it. So you can have the color, you can play with the font size and the way, which fonts you want to use in the text. And a tricky thing, logically thinking with CSS, is its name is Cascading Style Sheet. So cascading, when you think of a cascade, let's say like a waterfall or river, there's this like a top-down approach in CSS that means that the first thing that might be in a website, which basically is the top of a page, if you affect multiple things that are in that list, and you say, okay, I want all of them to be like this, that command that you give in the CSS, it's going to style everything. Let me just say hi to Margarita. Thanks for joining us. So your CSS, it has this function of one anecdote, or not anecdote, but one analogy is like if you wanted to, like if you have a river and there were two towns that are along this river, like if somebody was going to poison a town, who is it going to affect? So you put some poison in the water, it's going to affect somebody downstream. So if you put something upstream, it's going to affect everything downstream. If you affect something, like you can't put water, you can't put poison in a river and think that it's going to affect something upstream. So that's some of the tricky logic with CSS. We're not going to get too much into that today, because I just want to show a basic structure of HTML and JavaScript and how to get something dynamic. The following steps of making it look pretty, styling it, that in my opinion, as kind of more on this functional coding, I think the styling part comes second. I'm sorry if I offend any designers out there who say you need awesome design before you start building something. I think that can be a next step, and I just put this as a disclaimer. I am not a designer, and unfortunately, sometimes in my programming, the design aspect of like the coloring, the formatting, that seem to be like the later stages of what I'd like to build. So I usually focus on this dynamic aspect of the JavaScript and how it connects with the HTML. So I have an example here that I used with the program called Notepad++. There's a link below in the in these below the survey for you can download Notepad++. It's a pretty simple program. It's free that you can download. It's easy to use. It's very simple. And I'm going to show you a screen share, not of necessarily the Notepad++, but I'm going to do a screen share with a website called the w3schools.com, where you can basically put the code that you want to test. You can put this by itself, and you can see the results of what it's doing. So I'm going to just put this here so I can put these screens side by side, and I can see your comments in the text box. So, okay. So, do you have any questions so far about kind of HTML, JavaScript? No, there's a delay here between my speaking and seeing if you have any questions. So, okay. Well, we're going to get into this screen share here with the code. And I think I will show just a tiny bit of the code in the Notepad++ here. So let me go over here. So I'll have to watch the beginning of the replay to get caught up, but okay, that's fine, Margarita. But yes, basically, my analogy is HTML is kind of your floor plan in a house. It's where you put stuff. JavaScript is like your electricity and your plumbing of how you connect things to make things happen. So if you have a light switch, it's going to you need to tell it to do something. It's not just automatically going to do something. You have to give that action a purpose, and you have to connect an action to a button or some activity that a user might have on the web page. In the CSS might be like your interior designer who says, let's make all these things look pretty and uniform and have certain coloring and sizes and things. That's one aspect of CSS, but there's a lot of other things that you can do with it. So I'm going to do a screen share now, and I'm just going to make sure you can see my screen. So let me make sure you can see this code. Okay, let me go back to the web page over here. So let me know that you can see my screen. This might take a couple seconds for this to switch over. I'm also watching the video to see that as it's live, so I can check the text box in this. But you should be able to see the window here for the Notepad++. Can you see the screen with the code? So in this code, we have some basic things with the HTML. This is basically, I think of it like a shell. This is just your skeleton of what your web page could start out with. You give it this description that this is HTML code. Okay, it's blurry. I see that it's blurry. Okay. Let me see if there's any way I can zoom in. Let me see if I make this bigger. Does that help? I'll have to see if I can zoom in a little bit. No, unfortunately, I can't really how I can do the view. Let me see if this. Okay. Maybe I'm going to do a different way of showing the screen. Yeah, because that is a bit blurry. Let me do the screen share it a slightly different way. Okay, so there I am and there. Let me zoom in here and make sure I can go over here with the Okay, yeah, that's going up here. So I will try to zoom in on this a little bit more. No, I'm not sure I can zoom that. Okay, so I'll take this code and put it over in the W3 schools page. That might be another option here. So load this information up here, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit more. So in this, what we see here, let me see if you can see this a little bit better. So I just want to make sure that you can see the code clear, and I'm going to be giving a like a document where you can see the code that I've used here, and for that, okay. Okay, you can see that. Okay, so what we have here, and I hope you can see my mouse as well. So in this section here where it says doc HTML, we're just telling the website, we're telling the browser that's going to interpret this code. What are we looking at? Okay, we're looking at HTML code. So okay, and then this is where we get the HTML starting. And anytime you're doing HTML and any of these other coding languages like HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, you need to think of things in terms of like a parentheses or quotation marks. Whenever you start a quotation mark or you start a parentheses, you're going to have to close it. And if you don't close it, you're going to have a problem. So one of the ways in this case with HTML, when we close something, well, when we open it, we have here HTML. And then when we close it, we go all the way to the bottom here, we have this this slash. I'm not sure if this should be called forward slash or back. I think it should be forward slash. So we have a forward slash and then HTML. And then, so here I open up something and here I close it. Then just if we like imagine a web page like a body, we have a head or like a person, we have a head and a body. And there's some stuff we can put in the head which is probably not going to be visual, that you're not going to see necessarily when you load a page. So you might have this kind of behind the scenes content in the head. So one of the things that we might put in the head is the title of this web page. So when you go up to your tabs on a page, like here it says try it editor. So it's saying, let's close this. So the title, I'm here like the do-it-yourself web app building HTML sample. That's the title. If I ran this as a separate page by itself, I could go up to the tab and it would say this do-it-yourself web app building sample. Then, so again, I have to close something. I start with the title, and then I end with the title. Then as I started the head, I close the head. Next, I start the body, and then down here, I close the body. And then in between this section called the body, this is where you're going to put a lot of the stuff that would be visual on the web page. So you're going to get, let's say, a header that would be kind of usually the name of like an article, if you're going to write something as an article, or you're going to get maybe a paragraph, so you can see that. And this is your basic HTML things that you can put together. So you can put headers, you can put paragraphs, but there's a lot more things you can put in here. You can put buttons, you can put text boxes, but this is your basic shell of an HTML page. And I basically kind of copy and paste this shell whenever I get started building a web app. You need your structure that you can put something on here. So this is usually how I get started. So you have your head, and then you close the head, then you have your body, and then close the body, and then at the end, you're closing the HTML. And that's just kind of your encompassing of the information that you're working with. Now, the next thing that I put here are comments. So this has the structure of a caret, an exclamation point, and then 2 dashes. And then over here, it's got the 2 dashes and then the closing caret. So again, you open something, you close it. And the reason why you want to know how to do comments is because you want to know what you did. Because it's really frustrating when you go back to your code months later, years later, and you look at this, like it's hieroglyphics. You're like, whoa, what is this doing? So imagine like you had a recipe for food, and you just had the steps in there, but maybe like in your head, you remember, oh yeah, but I have to change this recipe slightly, or oh, that cooking time, that wasn't correct. I need to make some changes. Well, what happens if you never write those little annotations down? What if you just keep that stuff in your head? What if you go back to wanting to cook that recipe like 10 months later and you forget all your little extra steps or little tweaks? The chances are you might not remember all those little things. So comments in your code are a good way to help you remember what's going on. And comments, though, as long as they follow this structure of this caret and then exclamation point and this one, they're not going to be visual. You're not going to see this on the web page. So it's designed so that programmers, coders can help themselves remember what their code does, or it also allows you to kind of do debugging when you're testing things to see, okay, this section is a problem, so I'm going to put all this code surrounded by comments, and I'm just going to test this in this one section, and I'll make sure that, okay, while I'm doing that testing, it's not going to be a problem. And you can also put comments in to give yourself a priority list of, hey, this is where I got to on such and such a date. And then I need to go back and look at this section of the code. So usually in your code editor, you're going to have a line number. Here on this W3 Schools that I'm using, they don't have the line numbers. So it's a lot easier when you see that there's a line number, and You can remember, oh, I need to check out code line number 5, that there was a problem there. So when I come back to this code tomorrow or a week from now, I can put a comment and say, hey, go back and take a look at that. Okay, so that's basically what you're doing with HTML and the comments. So are there any questions so far about what's going on with your kind of HTML? So feel free to put questions in the text box. I'm able to see those questions as they're coming in. So basically now, what is like the meat of what I'd like to talk about is putting together your JavaScript and HTML. So what we got here is now I've added in an extra thing here called the script. So script here is my JavaScript. This is kind of like the electricity, the plumbing. This is kind of putting in the wiring of what I want stuff to do with an app. So before I get into too many of these details here, I'm going to go over here and show you the results of this. I'm going to see results. So I have this little quiz, and this is thanks to Nikki of the Savvy Online Marketing Group, who gave me some of these questions that she wanted to take a look at. So hi, Nikki, I hope this is helpful for you. So I have a button here, start the quiz. And thanks, Angie, for your feedback. I hope that that's been helpful so far. Cool. So okay, so I have a button here, and I have another button, and I have a text box. And I tell the people, like I give them just some feedback to get started. Okay, what do I want people to do? It's basically my call to action. Click the start quiz button. So I'm going to click the start the quiz button. And what's going to happen? This button, it's going to launch a function that I created. And if we're going to be logical about what we want it to do, what would you want it to do once you start the quiz? Okay, you want it to give a question and make that question appear. So that's what's going to happen here. So I'm going to start the quiz. And what just happened? I changed out the content that was up there before that said, click to start the quiz. So it's kind of like a light switch. When you have something turns on and turns off, you want to see some kind of a difference. So once I start the quiz, now the quiz has started, so the text is up here. Another thing that I could do is change the text that says start the quiz and delete this button once the quiz starts. And so that the only options now would be check your answer. So that would be a next step, is tweaking this a little bit further to polish up the appearance so that a user has a very limited possibility. So you want to limit potential problems with the code. So now if I go, okay, so I love listening, and this is a fill in the blank exercise. So I'm going to type in here, just to make a mistake, I'm going to put at. I love listening at music. Well, I'm going to check my answer, and it should be wrong. So this is another function that is going to give me some feedback. And the first time around that I do this, I usually have like an alert pop-up box. But those get really annoying because you have to click close each time. Pop-up boxes are one way that you can kind of test your functions, but they do get annoying rather quickly. So I prefer to have an on-screen feedback that gets inserted into the HTML. And so as you notice, I have this number here that's for this question, and I have the next one. And I've put in some logic into this check answer button that gives me two possibilities. It's either correct or incorrect. And if it's incorrect, well, nothing happens. I just get, well, I mean, not nothing happens, but I get the feedback that this answer was correct, and I get another opportunity to try again. So I'm going to have to go back here. And another thing that I could have done was delete the text as soon as it gave me here. But for some students, and in my own experience, sometimes if I just delete the mistake, maybe it's not evident to me of what was it that I did wrong. So I leave like the wrong answer there and let the student kind of reflect on this, like, well, what was wrong? Oh, maybe it isn't I love listening at music. Okay, maybe try 2. Okay, let me check my answer now. Okay, there, it was correct, and it moved on to the next question. So some apps that you might see on a website, they might just do like, check your answer, here's your answer, and then they have a button that says next answer. So that's another thing you might want to create in your app. You might want to let the student kind of reflect on, yes, this was correct. Or to keep things kind of flowing, you just give them the feedback and move on to the next question. So what's going on here? Okay, I'm proud of myself for passing the TOEFL. So that would be a cool thing to be proud of. So I'm gonna, let's say I make a mistake in the spelling. Let's say I put off. Again, it's gonna say it was incorrect. Try again. Oh yeah, I put 2 F's, it should have been 1. Okay, I got the feedback, it's correct now. And now I move on to the next question. So when we have the party outside, it depends on the weather. Check my answer. That was correct. Many people suffered from the earthquake damage. I'll put this. I waited for 45 minutes and the bus never came. That's correct. Check that. Okay, can you explain this to me? Check my answer. Let's again just test it, make sure, okay, if I put TOO, no, that's wrong. Okay, go back, put 2, check it. Okay, and my husband spends a lot of money on shoes. And on, check my answer. And in this case, to kind of, just for the sake of this, I let it kind of loop. So once I hit that question number 7, I let it go back to the beginning. So you don't have to do that necessarily. You could have something move on to, let's say, level 2. So this, I just decided to make this kind of a loop so that it'll kind of keep going back and forth and I can test these questions. Another thing I could do is put these questions in random order. So in that case, I wouldn't put the number, or I could have a number that is not necessarily this fixed order. So I can make things in random order, and that's what I like about dynamic quizzes, is that you never know what you're going to expect. And as a student, that keeps you on your toes. And that's one of the reasons why I like going back to some of my web apps, is that I'm going to get a new set of variables each time I try it. So I'm not going to get kind of this feeling that a test is kind of stale and static. So if you can play around with some variables in there, it's kind of cool. This one, it doesn't have variables, but it just kind of goes in order 1 through 7 and then loops back to 1. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. Let's see what it's doing. And don't get scared at what we're looking at. So, okay, my script, that's my JavaScript. I have to kind of put this information of what is in that quiz in my script. So what I need to do is develop a variable. A variable, this could be anything. This could be a number, this could be text, this could be, in this example, this is called an array. An array is kind of like a table of information that you might have on Excel. That, let's say you put like a column and you put information there, or let's say you put a row and you put information and you take all these kind of cells or items that are in there. So I created an array, a list or a group of questions. So these are the questions that Nikki gave me. So, and I added the number 1 just for the sake of kind of, for the sake of the order here. So I put these numbers in here, and then I separate this with a comma, and then I scroll down, and then I close this with a what? That's kind of strange. Oh, with a brackets, and I put a semicolon to kind of separate this information. So that's my first array are these questions. Another way you could do this is an object. That's a little slightly more advanced than what we're going to do today. But just to get started, it's easy to just build an array of information. So you put an equal sign, that means that you are assigning value to something. You're saying, what is questions? Questions is going to be this group, this list of questions. And how do I start that? I put this square bracket, and then, as I said, you have to close stuff, so you have a closing bracket. And then I separate all these items within that list with commas. So I have quotation marks around this text, and then I put a comma. Now, one thing you have to be careful with is sometimes the use of an apostrophe, because you can use double quotes and double quotes, or you can use apostrophes to create the same effect. But if your text in English contains, let's say, like I'm happy, like I apostrophe M, you might have a problem with that text. It's going to get kind of the code interpreter is going to misinterpret what that apostrophe is, because it uses apostrophes as a way of putting text together. But if you want to use an apostrophe within your text, you need to escape the apostrophe. That usually is putting a like a backslash next to it. I'll provide an example of that in the notes after this video, so that you can see what that difference would look like. So that's our first array, is these questions. And if we have questions, well, we need answers. So I set up my next answers, which is to, of, on, from, for, to, on, and I just finish with that. Okay, now my next variable is a counter. So my counter is what helps me go through my loop, and it helps me know what question are we on. So, but the tricky thing with programming and a lot of programming languages is that we don't start with the number 1, we start with the number 0. So a lot of people get frustrated with that, because the first item of a list, the first item of anything you do in programming is usually 0, and it goes from 0 to 9. It's not like the way we count in most languages to say 1 to 10. So that takes a little bit of some logic sometimes, and you need to be careful sometimes of if you are increasing a counter or you're trying to remember where are you with a counter. So be careful with that number, and just it takes a little bit of practice to get with it. So so in this, my function, when I start the quiz, so I hit that button, start the quiz, and I have a function. A function is like a set of commands, like a recipe. So what happens when somebody presses this button? They're going to do this recipe, or this set of commands. And how do I make sure that this is linked to the button? Well, all the way down here in my HTML, this is where I have like the layout of what's on the page. I start with my text that says click start the quiz to begin, and I have that button that says start the quiz. So here's that text that says start the quiz, and it's a button. So I have the button, and I have this on click. So what happens when I click start the quiz? I tell the program, hey, go find this function, this set of like a recipe, or these set of commands that are enclosed in this thing called start quiz. Yes. Okay. With I'm, the problem with I'm is with an apostrophe that's like inside your quotes is you're going to have to escape it. So let me just do a quick Google search here to show you that escape apostrophe in JavaScript. So I'll put here. And so how to escape a single quote or apostrophe in JavaScript. And this is a great place where I usually go for questions, Stack Overflow. They've got a lot of excellent things. So everything on here, like, okay, there's W3 schools, there's Stack Overflow. I'm gonna just take a look at this first one, how to escape a single quote. And basically you need to put, where is the example that they put here? Oh, this is part of a, part of using the change. And so here's your question of how do I do this? And then you have, usually what they tell you is, hey, this question has been asked before, don't waste our time. And they're going to give you some things like, okay, yeah, if it's HTML, not necessarily using the backslash for it. So another way, like to make sure that you don't have any problems, like the safest way is to use these things called quote or apostrophe. So as an escaped quote or apostrophe. And what you could put in here is to make sure that this isn't a problem. They say, okay, put quotes and quotes in this text so that it doesn't misinterpret quotes within a quote. So, and if you're using, well, JavaScript, one thing you can do is enclose a quote. You can enclose the apostrophe within the quote. So let me go back over here. So one thing you could do is this apostrophe, but the chances are you might get a vertical apostrophe, not like the typical apostrophe that you would have in writing. So let me go back over here in the try it editor. So let's say I go back up to these questions and I said, let's go to number 2 and say, I'm proud of myself for passing the TOEFL. So I could put in this, what they put here, the apostrophe text there. And let's kind of delete this. For some reason, oh, there it is. There, it put it in afterwards. Okay. Yeah, I put it in the wrong space, I think. So let me put here, see the results. And I'm going to start the quiz and go to I love listening to music. Okay, well, actually, it put the apostrophe in the middle of over here because there's something strange with the text editor here. So something is going on here. But as you can see in there, oh no, yeah, that does look like a vertical apostrophe. That's probably not what you want to do with your text. So the other option is is wrapping the apostrophe with quotes. So I'm going to close the content here with a quotes. Unfortunately, the text editor is making this look kind of strange. And then I'm going to use a plus symbol. Then I'm going to do quotes, then an apostrophe, then closing the quotes, and then the plus. So this would link the text together. And then after I do this, I need to make sure I open the rest of this text. So I'm going to try this result. Click to start the quiz. So what this has done is it has now kind of, it's put in another apostrophe there. It looks like they're double quotes, but it has just put in an apostrophe. Because over here, I have encompassed this apostrophe, like surrounding it by quotes. And then this other one here, that's the other way you could put it. So you can do an ampersand and an apos. I think that's the simplest way, instead of using these quotation marks and then wrapping the apostrophe with a quotation mark. And so, yeah, this one with wrapping the apostrophe with a quotation mark and then having the plus sign and then making sure you close your previous text and then open your next text, that gets a little complicated. So, I mean, you want to make things a little bit simpler. So I would recommend this ampersand apos, and make sure that you end it with this semicolon. So it's this whole thing of ampersand, apos, and then the semicolon. So you have the two approaches to use that. And instead of closing the text with quotes and then putting it in there. So that's one example, but I'll show you some other examples with the code. So okay, so where was I here? So I have the start quiz. It's this function that is linked to this start quiz button. So how do I know that? Okay, as soon as I click it, it's going to launch this start quiz function or this list of steps. And then I go back up to that, the set of the start quiz. And I have an if statement, some condition to see how do I get started with this. Well, if my counter keeps going up, it might go up like indefinitely as I use it. So I want to make sure it goes back to 0. So if the counter keeps moving forward and reaches the number 7, I'm going to have to set it back to 0, which basically this means if I got to a question number 8, which doesn't exist in this list, I'll have to go back to 0, which is the first one. And take a look at the order of these steps. This variable called counter is just before the function. So if I were to put the word variable after I start the function, I have 2 sets of variables. And what I mean by 2 sets is like their jurisdiction, if you wish. By putting this variable called counter and assigning it a value before I start this function, this makes it what's called a global variable. And it means that I can use this variable in multiple functions. I can refer to it in this function, and it's going to have the same value as it is here. And if I refer to this value in a different function, like check answer, and I'm using this thing called the counter, the reason why I can use that is because it is a global variable. The opposite would be is if I put this variable inside this function, it's going to be limited in scope. So its use would be only within the use of that function as I started. So if I create a variable called counter within function start quiz and I assign it a value, I will not be able to access that variable when I go to a different variable, a different function called like check answer. And as I was testing and creating this program, I had slightly forgotten about that. So it's good to kind of test my skills with this. But you do have a different usage of variables And you could compare this, I guess, to if you're in the United States and you say like state laws versus federal laws. Your global variable is kind of like federal laws that apply to all the states. And if you put this variable inside the function, it's kind of like state laws. So in terms of like, can you apply a state law in California to somebody in Texas? Well, no, because they're two different states. But could you apply federal laws to somebody in California and somebody in Texas? Yes, because the nature of something federal is that it applies to everywhere. And so a global variable has that function of you can use this variable in all your functions. But if you put that variable inside a particular function, it's only going to be useful inside that particular function. Just like California laws cannot be applied to somebody in Texas, or vice versa, somebody in Texas and their laws cannot be applied to somebody in California. So that's just one tiny thing with your variables, whether you make them global so you can use them everywhere, or you make them very specific to a certain function. So be careful with that, especially when you name them or you name them something similar. You want to help yourself be able to kind of walk through the steps of the logic. So, okay, now I've gotten past this if statement, and so I have my condition of the if, so I put this in parentheses. So what am I looking at? And also notice here, when I assign the value to the counter, it's got one equal sign. So that means I'm assigning value. In JavaScript, when I have two equal signs, this is a test. It's a logical test to say, do these two things have the same value? So when the counter has its value being added to, does it equal 7? So that's condition to say, like, yes or no. Does it fit this condition? If it does, then do this action. So now I'm assigning the value of the counter back to 0. So if the counter ever reaches 7, so that's my upper limit, my upper bound, I'm going to reset the counter. It's basically what I'm doing here in this line of code. So when it goes too high, I'm resetting the counter to go back to 0, which is basically my first question in the array. Next is this really awesome line of code called document.getElementById. So what is this doing? It is locating something on the HTML. So all of these things that are on here, I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that are on my HTML code. And how do I know that? Okay, I go back down here in my structure and I've got 5 things. I've got a paragraph and it has an ID. I have an input, a text box, it has an ID. I have a button, I didn't assign it an ID, but it's there. I have another button, it doesn't have an ID, but it's there. And I have a feedback paragraph, this one that says answer, that also has an ID. So the things that I want to make kind of dynamic or to pass information between things, I usually use an ID. So here's my ID question insert. Then I have my ID from the text box answer input. And then I have my feedback on the answers. So what I'm telling the code interpreter to do is, hey, go find something on the web page in the HTML that has this ID called the question insert. And its inner HTML is like the text that was there. You might be able to do some other things like its value or its text. But I think one of the simplest things that I usually use is just the inner HTML. And this inner HTML is the questions, that a list of questions, and the number of the counter. So the first time I start this quiz, the counter is at 0. So the 0 question is actually the first question. This is question 0 in programming. Although I look at it as number 1, it's technically question 0. So what am I telling it to do? I'm saying that thing that said, click on the start button to begin the quiz, I'm saying, okay, let's delete that text and let's put in our first question. So I have this get element by its ID, which is the question insert, and I'm saying I'm reassigning its value. I'm deleting the text that's in there, and I'm superimposing the question. So each time I do this function, it's going to check the counter, and then it's going to, as I have the question set here, this is like number 2, as soon as I start this, this function again, it's going to reinsert new question text. And then I'm also going to take the text box and assign it to a blank value. So it's going to delete any text that was in here. So it's kind of like a fresh start. So, and that's basically what it does. It inserts a new question is what it does, and it cleans the text box, and it checks the counter, and if the counter kind of it reaches its upper limit, it gets reset to 0, and the quiz starts over. Now the next button, check your answer. This has 2 sets of logic. So first I'm going to assign a variable called user answer. It's just a little bit easier to deal with, so it's not messy, so I have to use this code over and over. So I'm taking the value of that text box. So as a user inserts some text in here, this text box now has what's called as value. And how do I get the value? Well, I go get it. So I get this document.getElement by ID, the answer input, and I ask, what do I want from it? I want its value. Now I do my logic of saying, well, does the user answer match with these double equations? Does this match the same answers that would be in here? So my counter is the way that I keep track of which question I'm on, and I make sure that that question and its answer match each other. If they don't match like 100%, then there's a problem. So I have 2, like this situation, the condition, it has 2 possibilities. Either the answer is correct or it's wrong. Now what happens if it's correct? Okay, just like I up here had inserted the question, well, down here with the answer number 1 is incorrect or correct, I'm going to insert the feedback. So I'm going to use this getElement by ID feedback in its inner HTML, and I'm going to assign it a value of this feedback. So I'm using answer number. Then I'm going to take the counter and add the 1. So this is that problem where we talk about the counting of a counter in programming starts from 0, but for most humans, when we're speaking a language, we count from 1 to 10 and not from 0 to 9. So I'm adding that, like I'm kind of correcting the number so that it looks the way most people would relate to a language in terms of numbers. So this counter is +1. And I put parentheses around it because if I don't, there might be a problem in terms of the logic of it might, for example, it might put the number 11, which is 1 and 1, instead of actually adding value to the counter. And also what I'm doing is I'm not actually incrementing the counter itself, because the only way I can increment the counter itself is by like using an equal sign or a plus like this. This is a shorthand for saying increment the counter. It's a shorthand for saying the counter equals the counter +1. So this is a shorthand code to just say increment the counter, add 1 to it. But here what I want to do is use this number 1. So this means that, okay, the previous answer was at 0, the counter was at 0. I'm adding 1 to it, so it means that answer number 1 was correct. And I have what's correct. And then what happens after it's correct? The counter gets incremented, and then this start quiz function happens again. It's going to move forward in the list to move to the next question, and I'm going to start the process over again. So that's what this is doing. It's checking my answer. If it's correct, it's going to tell me that it was correct. It's going to increment the counter, and it's giving me the next question. Or, which is else, basically, or it's going to tell me, sorry, that was wrong. And does it increment the counter? No. Does it give me the next question? No. So these are these two slightly different responses or feedback that I get with these two functions. And I know this unfortunately looks really complicated, and a lot of these steps and a lot of this these lines of code that you kind of have to work through. But sometimes you just want to go back on like pencil and paper and think of the logic of what is it that you want something to do. And sometimes you have to kind of anticipate some strange behavior, like a light bulb or like a light switch. You think that it has two functions, on and off, but in reality, you've got like 4 scenarios. What happens to a light switch if it's already on and you turn it on again? Well, technically nothing should happen, but a user could do that. A user could click a button that activated something and tries to click it again to activate it again. What's going to happen? So you need to anticipate that behavior. And if a light switch is off and you turn it off again, you need to anticipate that kind of behavior as well. So one thing when you're doing these kind of programs or these simple things is you really need to sit down with the logic and maybe on like pencil and paper and kind of think of all of the scenarios, like what happens when a user clicks this button? Okay, what happens if they put the text and it's wrong? So the debugging aspect, or kind of trying to anticipate many different scenarios, can be you may kind of rack your brain a little bit on the logic, but a big part of this programming is going through the logical steps, like painfully going through the steps. Like if you have children and you have to teach them, like, okay, put your shoes and socks on. I mean, it's not that obvious, like for an adult. Like, okay, what do you have to do first? Okay, you need to put the sock on your foot. What happens if you put the sock on your foot after you put the shoe on? So like you have to kind of go through these steps and think of like what step should go before the next one, and what's going to happen when you interact between 2 different buttons or things like that. So that's one scenario here. Let me just go through the program itself again here. I'm going to so I'm on this. I'm proud of myself. Okay, and what did that just do? It checked my answer. It gave me the feedback, and then it changed the question. I'm on number 3, and then it's getting this fill in the blank, and I have to fill in an answer. I have my input. I click my button to see, okay, does this answer match the list of answers? And if it does, well, I get the feedback that's going to say answer number 3, which is basically the counter plus 1. So right now the counter, it's technically at, it should be at 2. It should be 1 less than this question. So next is going to be, okay, 3, and now I'm on 4. And then as I do this, keep going. Another thing here is I just try to use the enter button, and nothing happens because I did not program that into this. That's another function that you would probably want to do, is you would set up the enter button. That's a very typical thing that programmers do, is when they have a text box and there's going to be an obvious button that somebody wants to click, they can link the return button from your keyboard and associated with the function. So basically, you're waiting for an event to happen. An event would be the return key. So if I hit the return key right now, nothing happens because I didn't program it in there. So that's another thing you want to interpret user experience. What is something that they might do? So right now it's frustrating because I wanted to hit the return button. It didn't do anything because I didn't program it in there. So I have to go over here and click check your answer. So the next step I might do is include a return key in my code. So as I test this and I used it as like I test the user experience, I think of what is one thing I could make to improve this code. Is it intuitive? Is it very obvious what should be done? If it's not, how can I improve it? So maybe one thing I might do is get rid of this start quiz button because that's going to maybe like that might be a problem. So what happens if I hit this start quiz button again? Well, oh, okay. Uh-oh. So I think I'm going to have a problem here. I didn't anticipate that. So what's going to happen? Nothing happened or something did happen? Well, let's see what happens. Okay, well, actually, it didn't do anything. Or basically what it did is it took the counter and the counter was still there. So it did something. It's just you couldn't see it. It's because of the code over here that says what happens when I click the button start the quiz. Well, it didn't reset the counter because it didn't have to. So it checked the counter. Was it 7? No. So it didn't do anything. So the counter has not changed. It just inserted the same question that was already there. So is this like good behavior for the app? Well, no. No. Now let me check again to see like, okay, this text should disappear when I click start the quiz. Is it? Yeah, it disappeared. How do I know? Okay, because it did go through this. It just reinserted the same question, and because it did this step where it deleted the value that was in that text box. So it technically did do something. It's just, if I just click the button again like that, I get the impression that it did nothing, but it actually did go through all these steps and check the logic of the counter. It overwrote the text that was there, but because it was so fast, you don't see a difference. And it deleted the value. Right now, there's nothing in there. I'll test it again. Blah, blah, blah. Click start again. Okay, it removed it and made it this thing. So you need to test your buttons and see what happens and kind of get an idea how is a student, how is a user going to interact with this. This is just one simple, sorry, I mean, it isn't completely simple, but it does take some practice, it does take some logic, it does take some steps. But like this is one of the first things that I started to do when I was getting started. Let me just go briefly over to my website and give you an idea of like where can this go? What can you do with these things? So this is one of the more advanced ones that I've created on here. So what I have going on here is I have put in drop-down menus. So I've turned this into a dictionary. And I have made this list. So it basically functions as a dictionary. So okay, bad is plahoy and bag is sumka. So that's that. I've also turned this into a Spanish Russian drop-down list. It's just for reference purposes as I'm doing this. If this was too small for me to, or if it was too big, I can make the font size smaller, or I can make this a little bit bigger. My computer's a little slow. So those are two things for the user experience on there. And because this is Russian grammar, there's a lot of complex things that goes into the Russian grammar. And so just briefly, so if I want to say, okay, Spanish girl, so I created this on-screen keyboard, which is a lot of buttons and a text box. And then I'm checking the information here. So this should be no, I need to delete that. So Ispanskaya Dievotchka. I think if I forget the word for girl, I can go up here and look for girl and say, okay, Dievotchka. So, okay. Sorry if you don't care about Russian. It's just to show you this app. But so Ispanskaya Dievotchka. So is my spelling right? I think it is. I'm going to check it. And yes, I get my feedback. Yes, Spanish girl is Ispanskaya Dievotchka. Now, I created this really complicated, complex table, which fills up as I go through the exercise. And it's giving me a lot of percentages on here of here is my adjective, Spanish. Here is my noun, a girl. And this is going through the masculine, the feminine, the neuter. It's also going through, this is the nominative case in singular, and this is the nominative in plural, and it's going through all of these cases and all of this feedback, and it's giving me breakdowns of the percentages of my success. Okay, so far I got 100% on the nominative case for the not as an adjective, and for the noun. So the more times I do this exercise, it's going to fill up with data. And also what's kind of cool is that I can take this data and I can export it. Normally I should be able to export it, I thought. I guess I need to go back and there's supposed to be somewhere that I can kind of download. I think I had that on another app, but no, I don't have a download the report. I think I have that on somewhere else. I didn't include that on this one, but on another app that I was developing, I created something a link so you could download the report and export it. So using it. So that is one thing that I've done. Let me go back through and I mean, like the very first thing that I started to do was something with like Spanish English nouns and determiners, and this was kind of just getting started with my vocab test. And this goes back to last May, 3 years ago is when I got started with this stuff. And then this has kind of evolved slightly. Like I put in this the on-screen keyboard, and I'm going to give like this is basically stealing one thing that you might find from W3 schools that says click the button to do something. And so I basically took that. So how do you say a fork in Spanish? Okay, un tenedor. Okay, a fork, yeah. And then if I had a mistake, I could go back and review them. So that's one thing here. So I'm going to try that again. Let's say that option, ese opción, and or let's say I forget the accent mark, and I'm going to correct that. No, okay, I forgot the accent mark. So I'm going to review my mistakes. Okay, my mistake was, how do you say, a fork? Okay, un tendedor. Okay, I had a spelling mistake, so it's un tenedor. Check that. Okay, now it's correct. And I'm getting more numbers here and more percentage of my, and then I'm going to continue with reviewing my mistakes. I said that option before, it was esa opción. Okay, I forgot the accent mark, so it's esa opción. I'm going to check that, and that's that. Okay. And then CSS was not really a big thing to talk about today because it's kind of a little bit more advanced. But one thing that I One thing that I do like that I created with CSS that gets really kind of cool is this verb conjugator for English verbs. So I've got my colors that are on here, and this updates the board with all these conjugations. And I can change this based on like a slider. I can change things to I, and I can go through here and go through these verbs, and the whole board updates with the conjugation based on that verb. So this is something where you can use CSS to interact with. Here I'm scrolling in a set of boxes, and then I use classes. A class is kind of a group of words. I assign it a value. So these words that are up in the table that are blue, they're supposed to be taking information from this blue word here. And the one that says that's in orange, it's taking it from here. And the one in yellow, it's taking it, like if I move over to he, she, it, it's going to take these cases there. So this is some kind of stuff you can do with CSS where you get some more interactivity and make it really dynamic for students if they're kind of wanting some kind of a very quick and easy way to look at the screen and see how this thing evolves, and you click a button, you scroll over something, and it becomes dynamic, and then you can review it. And then this is another thing with CSS where you kind of superimpose circles and things. So, okay. One other thing, just kind of going through, I guess, I mean, you can take a look at these web apps on your own. I'll provide the link. And I think one of my second exercises with English grammar was kind of turning sentences into variables and building sentences based on the subject, the verb, the tense, and then making this into a way so a student could test this and say, okay, so I clean, past perfect, interrogative, how long? So I can give myself some hints and say, okay, the verb ending, okay, I need the past participle. How many possible answers? Okay, there might be two because of like contractions and things. How many auxiliary verbs? Oh, I need, okay, had. Which auxiliary verb? Oh, okay, I need had. And the complete structure, how long had, okay, the subject, and then the verb with the past participle. So how long had I cleaned? Grammatically correct, it might not be the most semantically correct sentence to ask somebody, but I check my answer, I get some feedback, good job, and then I get the statistics here, 1 out of 100%. And then I refresh, and I get a new set of variables. And that's just kind of an English like tenses that you can go through, and I can go to a specific tense, and I can maybe go to a specific type of like everything in the present or everything with simple. I can also go and work with a specific person. So maybe like say she, and I maybe want to do a specific verb. These are just a simple set of verbs, and maybe I want to put the present simple, and I want to go with the negative. So what's my structure here? She does not explain. Okay, she does not explain. And I check my answer, and then that's correct. So that is another one of these apps that I've done. Getting into a little more complex stuff that I've gotten to more recently is I think I have to go back to just the main website itself, and I have to update some of these links that are on there. And this is this multilingual vocabulary trainer, which I started about a year ago. I need to update it a little bit more. So this includes audio, pictures, and text. So this is kind of like a memorized Rosetta Stone experience, just to get started with it. and it's going, so a mountain in English and a mountain in Portuguese. I think I don't have the audio there. I haven't uploaded the audio, but I have an audio file here with Portuguese. Uma montanha, yeah. Okay, so I had audio files uploaded to Dropbox, and then I have the audio file play here, and it associates it with a like a stock photo, free digital photos here with this mountain. And just to show you some of the more of the audio, I could go between, let's say, Russian and Portuguese, just to try this. So, gara, okay. Or let's say I wanted the opposite, Portuguese to Russian. Okay, so I'm associating these two languages and the spelling and a picture, and this is a way to kind of go through and learn new vocabulary. And then I could test myself and say maybe translate the words or label the pictures, or translate the words and have the pictures, or identify the pictures. So let's say refresh here. Okay, what is this? Okay, is this a key? Is this a mobile telephone? Is this a TV? Or is this a newspaper? Okay, this guy is reading a newspaper. Yeah, okay, yeah, da, gazeta, that's correct. Okay, what color am I looking at here? Am I looking at white belly, chorny black, żółty, I think that's yellow, or krasny, I think that's red. Okay, I'm looking at the color white belly. Okay, what part of the house am I looking at? I think this, okay, this is Padushka, I think that's a pillow. Dver, that's the door. Stalavaya, I think that's where you have like the stall, the table in the room, so it's a dining room. And divan, that might be a sofa. So I think this is the dining room. Yeah, it was. Okay, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the moon. Okay, that's Luna. I'm looking at a horse. Okay, that's Loshit. Where am I? I'm at the supermarket. What is this? Okay, this is a hat. I think that's Schlappa. Okay, I'll change this to another language so it's not so not so crazy. Okay. Okay. This. Oh, sorry. This is going into. Let's make this translate from Spanish into English. So I'm looking at like, okay, this is a boy or a man. Okay, it's a man. Okay, I'm looking at a river, or there's a classroom or a school. I'm at the bank. It's a baby. That's the color red. That's a cell phone. There's a restaurant. Okay, so I'm identifying the pictures, or here I'm labeling the pictures. Okay, what? Oh, okay, that's an eye. I'm going to check that. Yeah, it's an eye. So here I'm labeling. Okay, what is that? That's blue. And maybe I want to do this in another language, or so on. And then maybe I might do both of these things where, okay, what's una llave? Okay, if I forget what a llave is, maybe I can scroll down here and I see a picture and I can practice with this stuff and I say, okay, una llave en español. Okay, what is that in English? It's a key. Okay, yeah, and that's correct. It's a key. Okay, and un vaso. Okay, do I remember what a vaso is? Okay, maybe I have a hesitation on that. Okay, here it is with the glass. Okay, so that's just some of the stuff that I've been able to accomplish in the last like 3 years, is putting together these things that have pictures, putting together so I can have a little bit of text to speech, and I can have people record audio for me. But that's basically, these are some of the ideas that will be happy to share with you. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask me. And I'm going to be making little videos kind of based on these programs that I've made myself. So I'm going to stop with the screen share now and go back to me. And so thank you very much for hanging out with me and going through this kind of the webinar of getting some of the basics for how to use how to get from like basic JavaScript and HTML to getting to some of these more advanced features where you can combine text and pictures and audio and getting some color and getting some interaction with what things people can do um, for the just quizzes and apps and ways to learn low vocabulary and learn some grammar. So thank you very much. And I know there's a little bit of a delay with the video, but so thank you again for watching this. I'm watching the video and seeing that it's still on a slight delay. But thank you very much for your feedback, and I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to provide some of these, what I showed you in the first example that we walked through. I'm going to provide that as a document that you can take a look at. So I'm going through some of the questions, but yeah, I definitely agree to assimilate the content and try to practice using it. So I'll give you some exercises. Make sure, like, send me a message on Facebook or Twitter to let me know. So thanks. So I'm going to end the recording here. Thank you again for attending, and I'll be sending you guys some exercises through either Facebook or Twitter or email. Just let me know that you attended and that you want to practice some of these things. So thank you very much, and yeah, keep an eye on your apps and try testing them out, and thank you again. Take care.